Well, hello, I'm Alone in Finland. Today I wanted to speak to you a little bit about the sort of gaming industry in general and why it's suffering so many problems. And we've been through this an awful lot on this channel with EVE Online specifically, but there's a lot of comments that are talking about the sort of negative side of EVE, and I don't disagree with them, but people, when they're referring to it, seem to be sort of emphasising that this is a problem that's only in EVE, and it's absolutely not. It's the entire gaming industry. So what I wanted to do was go through a little bit of that today, and just because I've been doing it for a little while, I was going to go through it in Space Engineers because this is a game that I absolutely love. It's been one of my favourites for a while, up there with EVE and Kerbal Space Program and a lot of the spacey based games, and I'm just going to throw this in because I've been sort of pushing a mate to try it as well. If you are a story based gamer and you haven't played Death Stranding, give it a go. It is a long sort of story. The first sort of 3 hours of my gameplay were over 2 hours of cutscenes, but it is just a work of art. It truly is. So with that being said, I wanted to sort of go through a bit of the groups that are responsible for some of the problems that we've got, and just the groups that are involved in general, because a lot of people sort of, when they're talking about them, they talk about the developers, and there's a lot of, if there's something that people don't like, there's a lot of anger towards the developers, and I think that's very unfair, because you're essentially blaming the middlemen, and a lot of different terms get sort of lodged in together when you're talking about the developers, because you're essentially talking about everybody on the game side, and most of them are not developers, and that's a very unfair comparison in my opinion. So let's start with the groups and sort of the derivations within the groups, because if you just look at players in general, we start here with our little loyal player, and you have a couple of sort of variations within the player base, because you have, for general gaming, you have people who prefer solo or multiplayer games, but it's also the style. Do they prefer to play solo or play multiplayer? Because one of the big misunderstandings with multiplayer games is people think that it's only people playing them that want to play with other people. And that's actually one of the biggest sort of misconceptions when it comes to online gaming, is that just because you're gaming in a space with other people, that you want to game with other people. And it is a sort of, for me, I prefer solo play for the vast majority. I like the community and the chat around about it, but if I go on and play the likes of Counter-Strike or things like that are even team-based games, I prefer to be doing my own thing while supporting the team. So it's not something that's a case of I want to be in the space and having to deal with other people all the time, because dealing with other people is a headache. It can be fun, it can be fantastic, and constructing things can be amazing, but it can also be something where you just don't want to do it, and that's part of the reason why I sort of stay out of the big alliances and stuff like that these days, even though I was a part of them in the past, is because all of the politics, especially nowadays when you've got so much of that nonsense in real life, that you just want a break from any of that, because essentially politics is just people gossiping. So it's just that the he said she said that you get in the childhood playground, and it's sort of built into our entire society all the way up. We call it politics when it's countries or people against each other, but it could be different groups and all of that stuff, and maybe you just want a sort of break from it. But then you've also got the type of players, even within those two groups, the solo or the multiplayer, that are, maybe you get people that are story based games, people that like multiplayer games that are where you're playing with a group but you're all focused on the same story, pushing it forward. I think Helldivers at the moment is quite a good sort of description of this, because there's so much lore and the whole group seems to be pushing towards the same thing, which I think is a brilliant way to do games. Back in the day, for me, there used to be one of the Alien vs Predator games where you could actually do missions where it was just sort of, it was only 5 or 8 people in the multiplayer, but you could stack up everybody against the PC, against all of the aliens, and it was just wave after wave, and there was quite a satisfaction that came with that, just sort of fighting off all of these waves. But then from the story, you've also got the action based, because some people love their action games, they love that fast thrill, that adrenaline rush, which also links into what I call addiction based gaming. Now, this isn't a deliberate negative, but I think it's sort of something very specific in their gaming, because you have people that, for instance, the newest game comes out and they have to get it. They haven't played it, they don't know what it's like, but they've seen the hype and they've jumped at it. And I think all of us have been that at some point. For me, it was one of my biggest pains was when Destiny came out, because I actually fell into all the hype for that for the first time in years. And when I bought Destiny, it was a heap of unpolished crap, because the first thing that I noticed was some of the animations were deliberately sort of ported over from Halo, but the company behind it had specifically said that they weren't using anything. And the first thing I see is that little sideward swipe that the little munchkins used to do in Halo, and I'm going, well, that's been ported, so what else has? Why are you talking about this massive development figure of like 320 million if I am seeing stuff, when you're saying it's all original content, but I'm seeing the exact same thing there. And then there was a whole load of side effects, connection issues and all sorts of stuff that really sort of made me hate that game, essentially, because it was something I had looked forward to so much. And then even with all the issues, I managed to complete the game in under 8 hours. And it just tainted me against the entire thing, and I haven't played the Destiny since. But that is what we all sort of, a lot of people buy into that for the addiction-based gaming, where it could be the new shiny thing, or it could be Counter-Strike, where you just want to win, you want to be better, you've got that adrenaline rush from it. So it's an action game, but it's also the competitive aspect that becomes addictive. So you sink tens of thousands of hours into a game where you're doing the same thing, and I am entirely guilty of this, because I was playing Counter-Strike since it was a mod for Halo, before it was its own game. In fact, I was playing so long ago that one of the maps actually had a tank on it, and it's still funny to me that you mention that and people go, you don't have vehicles in Counter-Strike, and you really did at one point, back when your lowest ping was in the sort of 300 range. So that's the sort of main groups that you get. You'll get people that are solo or multi, you'll get people that are story or action or the addiction hook into it. And one of the interesting parts with a lot of these games, especially EVE Online, is that it brings in all of those groups together. But people make that mistake of thinking that it's just one type of game, that somebody who plays a fast-paced multiplayer game doesn't really care about the story or the lore behind it, or conversely, somebody who is that fast player in multiplayer sort of wants to do all this might not have something else going on, that gamers can cross genres. And one of my friends who is absolutely insane when it comes to all of the latest online game, he's played all of the very fast action games. His other sort of genre is JRPGs, and like he does an awful lot of the school-based ones, and they just confuse the life out of me. I don't understand how his brain works in two methods that are so far apart, but it is what he likes, and it's awesome for him. So after we've got that, we also have the developers themselves. Now, these are the people who program the game or test the game, so it could be quality assistance. Oh, the shadows are coming. I'm going to shift something. It could be the people that are actually writing the game. It could be people developing the engines and things like this. And we have a whole load of developers that are in various different stages, different niches. It could be somebody in graphical design or one of the artists, but these are the people that are making the game. And the developers themselves, it's the motivation that's there, because everybody has different motivations for actions. You could have people that are motivated purely by the money. They want a job, they can do that, they can use the skill set, but they have no interest in what they're producing. They are just doing it. And you also have this sort of skill that comes into that. Everybody, for every reason, has this varying skill, but people that are doing it just for the fact of doing it, while it's sort of seen as a negative, it's not always a negative, because somebody with the skill set but no interest might actually take a step back from what's going on and look at it and go, I don't think this is good. Whereas somebody who might love the game that they're developing might not see an issue, because they're sort of love blind to the issue in front of them. And that comes on to the next type of developer, the people that are in it for the love. And this comes into an awful lot of indie developers, because you have indie developers that are making a game and they're sinking all their time into it, and whether they sort of like it or don't like it at the beginning, it's an idea. Because of the amount of time spent, that interest in the game, that love in the game sort of evolves with them. And again, they can be very good when it comes to building something that they love, or it can be very bad. And this is something that comes up that I talk about with Eve an awful lot, where they get into a mindset of, this is my game and this is how you should play it, which is, it might be one thing for like a story or a linear game, but if you're talking about a massive multiplayer game, trying to force somebody in an open world to do a specific thing, that gets a lot of backlash. And that is one of the things that Eve suffers from an awful lot when it comes into nerfing or development changes that force people to do it one way. Pirate Software actually did a very good video on this when he was talking about why he doesn't play Eve anymore, because he was a player that went into Eve with a big group around about the Poshvin expansion. Unfortunately, I missed that because of, well, kids. But they went into Poshvin, a whole load of people, and they took over and they did everything that was there. And then one of the main systems that was a whole like foundational idea behind Poshvin, where you had to be allied to the Triglavians, and that would give you access between the Triglavian gates, they pulled that out and then essentially nerfed Poshvin in a way that it was supposed to be similar to wormhole space, but all of a sudden it wasn't. And that nerf was severe, and it was so severe that a whole load of people quit the game. While I don't think that that was the main reason for the biggest drop that you had at the time, I think a lot of the reasons sort of coincided around that time where you had the redistribution of ores and things like that, and that caused massive problems within that game. But that can be a problem with the developer's sense of ownership and love over the product that they are creating. And then we have the sort of differences even between those, where you have the money or you have the love aspect for the game. You also have the large group versus a small group, because if you have a small group of developers that are very sort of entwined, you usually have a better interaction system between them. And this was a perfect example of Kerbal Space Program. When it started, there was a small knit community, they had a fantastic forum, they took feedback, they listened to everything, and they developed it alongside the community, listening to all of the feedback. Then if you had to round about Kerbal Space Program, I think it was 1.13 or 1.16, where Take-Two Interactive bought over the company, a whole load of the developers left because they saw which way the wind was blowing, and all of a sudden you had a development team that may have had a little less on the skill requirement just because they hadn't been there as long and they hadn't built it from the ground up, but also they didn't have the same investment. And that caused problems because the development team got bigger, so things sort of went the wrong way because the team was expanding, because a small group of people can be more efficient than a bigger group of people when it comes to certain things, because of the communication lag. If you are one person telling 3 people what they need to do, or you are 4 people making a decision, there's a lot less intercommunication between those 4 people than it would be a team of 100. So that's just a sort of an efficiency thing. Sometimes a small development team can work a lot better, and when you get bigger teams, and especially when you get the likes of layoffs and rehiring happening within companies as they grow, then you start to get these communication issues, because all of a sudden people are not sort of beholden to the job, and some of the skill set has been lost, some of it has been reproduced, and as somebody who's existed there for a while, you might just sort of not think about something and not think you have to tell the next person. So that can cause issues with development and things like that. Now, after this, one of the other essential groups is what we have here. Now, I'd put myself in this group, because what I would say is this is the critics and tubers. So YouTube, people that are on Twitch and things like this. In my opinion, those people can be as valuable as normal critics, and in some cases critics are less valuable. There is one that I hold in absolute high esteem, which is jsut, because for all of his reviews, he's never been somebody who bowed down to monetary pressure. He's been told to review things, and it's never been something where they've managed to restrict him or make him give a good review. It's always something that's honest. Whereas if you take the likes of GameSpot or something like that, you're getting these reviews which are just polished to the shine, so that they don't piss off the people, because in some cases they're reviewing a game honestly, and in some cases they are paid to review it. So that's where this honesty comes in. And you also have this when it comes to YouTubers and people that are streaming on various platforms, where you don't know what their motivations are behind it. There's one, I used to watch a group of people, and I won't name them, but there was a group of people that played games, and one thing that kept coming up, and it's gotten worse and worse over time, and it was the entire reason I stopped watching them, even though I used to really enjoy them, is because they keep screaming about content. And they stream every day, and in some cases they are streaming games that they all hate. And there's been comments that have made it into their clip shows on YouTube where they go, "Why are we doing this?" And somebody screams, "Content!" And I'm sat there just watching that going, well, like, why? Just why? If the entire point of this is watching somebody who's enjoying playing the game, and you're just not just even pretending, you're just going, "Nah, we hate this. Nah, this is awful." So that's something that kind of shows why they're doing what they're doing. And it's fine if it's I say it's fine if it's somebody that's showing the game, but I don't actually think it is. I like games that people are honestly playing and given a good representation for. I got into EVE Online because of I got into a Kerbal Space Program because of a YouTuber called Robass, and he was just playing on the very early days before it had been fully released. And it looked interesting, it looked fun what you could do with it. It was just essentially Lego on a computer with a gravity engine behind it, a physics engine behind it. So I went and tried the game out. And it was that good that I stayed invested, and I bought all of the expansions as they came out. I was on the forums and did a lot with that, and on a separate channel I used to make a couple of little videos for that. I did a couple of long series of it, which were, when I was doing these series, there was 20 hours of gameplay per video. The reason I stopped was because of the whole kids thing. But that sort of reference, having somebody honestly playing a game, is one of the best advertisements you can get for it. Whereas somebody playing just because they have to, or playing a game that they dislike because they've been paid to, or reviewing it, that is a problem. And it can be a problem because it can mislead people into buying a game that they wouldn't necessarily have bought. So that's something that's quite important in the space, because you have these people that are either honest and giving fantastic opinions like Yahtzee, or you have people that are just screaming content and making whatever they can because they've pigeonholed themselves into an existence where this is their only income, so they have to do it to sort of maintain. But in my opinion, that's also a self-destructive thing. It's worked for some people in the past, but with the way that money sort of shifts on these platforms, it's not working so much anymore. And the more that you sort of alienate people, the natural drop-off that happens is as people sort of move on in their lives will become a bigger issue, because nobody is going to start watching content that you are admitting you are hating creating. Whereas your older players are the ones that came in earlier on and sustained you. So that's something that I think is sort of essential to look at in this particular talk about what's the problems that we're having with the gaming industry, because of the fact that that's a big thing that is sort of turning people off of some games, or in some cases making them buy a game they might not have and then not liking it, so turning them off the next game. And I think talking about that's kind of essential. But then we have another big problem with the gaming industry, and this is where we start to go back to the companies, and we're talking about the managers, because the managers in gaming companies are not the developers. And this is where I think that it's very essential that we start splitting those two, because the managerial set is not always the same as the development set. You have managers that have a gaming background, but more and more as these companies sort to merge or new companies are created, the managers actually have a managerial or an investment background, so they don't care about the games. A big example of this recently was what happened with Dungeons and Dragons. If you don't know, Hasbro owns Dungeons and Dragons, the actual board game and the licensing and all of that jazz, and the investment banking manager that was at the top of the Dungeons and Dragons company decided that he was going to essentially screw all of the players and all of the YouTubers and all of this, and they released essentially an EULA, that if you were going to create content online, they owned it. And it was this contract that basically it couldn't stand up in a European court, but it could in an American court. And it was just hate-filled. It was something that they were trying to bully everybody into giving them their content. And part of it was because they were creating this new online thing for Dungeons and Dragons, and their entire idea, which they have admitted, was that they were going to push Dungeons and Dragons digital, which doesn't work. You can't just shift the entire platform. It's like if CCP came out tomorrow, or Keen Software that makes Space Engineers came out tomorrow and said, well, we are getting rid of the computer game entirely, and we are going to make it a board game, and there will be no computer game going forward. That's going to piss off an awful lot of people immediately, and it's exactly what it did. And this fan backlash was so severe that they ended up doing an entire 180 on it, because it impacted their actual money. So many people cancelled their online accounts for I can't remember the name of it, for the main sort of D&D online system that was owned by the company. So many people cancelled all of their payments and things like that. It hit them in the wallet, which is the place you need to hit them to actually make any change. And it reversed to come the sort of direction of a multi-billion pound company. So that's something that's significant, because that is something that the actual developers, the people behind the game that had been there from the beginning, said was the dumbest idea possible, but the managers decided to do it. And it was some pressure from above because of the next group that we'll talk about, but it was a decision at the management level that led to this insane stupidity. And this also exists in certain things within the gaming spectrum, within the PC gaming spectrum, the Xbox and PlayStations and stuff like that. It's the fact that you have people that have no interest in the product they're creating. And while that could occasionally be an advantage if it's a developer, if it's a manager, it's the most dangerous thing you could get, because you can alienate everybody, or you can alienate a large chunk of your fan base, which is something that is you have to be careful of. And then the last group that we have is just the sort of insane conglomerate. And the insane conglomerate is who owns the product. Now, when we're talking about the ownership, it could be a single person. Back in the day, CCP Games was a couple of people. Keen Software was a couple of people. When you're looking at Kerbal Space Program, there was a couple of developers there that owned their product, and they made fantastic products for it. And while I have my own sort of issues with EVE Online, even though I love the game, I don't always agree with what the owners particularly wanted, especially when it was the whole, we will force you into nullsec, or we will screw with your high sec, or sort of force you to play the game one way, which is always a dangerous thing. But that gets sort of limited because of the player, the critic feedback. Anybody who is critical of the decision has a voice that can be heard and will be focused. But then you get the different types of owners. You might have a group of owners. Some of them might be silent or not. You might have corporate ownership, and then the worst of all, the actual investment bank ownership. Now, this is actually where CCP sits at the moment, because CCP, as people may know, was bought out by the company that did Black Desert Online. The two owners of Black Desert Online, because the original creators were their own thing, they are no longer the full owners. One of the creators holds about 4% of the shares, another creator holds about 30% of the shares, and then over 60% or just under 60% of the shares of that company are owned by investment banks. So they have to produce money for shareholders. If you don't know the sort of reason for this, or the reason that this is a problem, the easiest thing is to look at healthcare in the US compared to the UK. In the UK, we pay our taxes, and some of those taxes go towards healthcare, and you get healthcare that is free at the point of service because everybody's taxes make it. So if you need a doctor, you go in, you get a doctor. That's it. Now, there's not always enough money just because of the way that taxes work, but essentially there is basic healthcare for everybody. If you look at the United States, people pay their taxes, and a part of that tax goes towards healthcare. It's the exact same as the UK. However, for people that don't know, about 4 times the amount of money per person is spent on the US healthcare system by the government. That's not subsidies, that's not money that's taken away, that's an actual monetary value that is paid for healthcare. So the US spends 4 times more per person on healthcare. But that's not enough, because the healthcare system isn't government owned, it's owned by companies, and companies have shareholders. So a lot of that money that is paid for by the government doesn't go towards healthcare, it goes towards profits and dividends and things like that that go to the shareholders, which means that the healthcare in the US is massively underfunded. And it's underfunded so much that another 46 times the amount of money per person that the UK spends on their healthcare is then spent in insurance. So people have to pay insurance on top of that, and that insurance that is 50 times, some estimates have put it at 56 times, the highest spend in the UK has ever had on their healthcare, which was around about 2007, 2006. That level of money is being put into a system that is on par with one that costs a 50th of the price and is free at point. So that's how much money can be extracted by shareholders and things like that. That is all money that is not going to the actual healthcare. There's other things around about that. For instance, ambulances are free in the UK, and ambulances in America will cost you for certain circumstances, and all sorts of things around about it. But that's a good analogy, from my opinion, of the difference between something that is owned by a small amount of people and run for that purpose, or something that is owned just to extract profit from it. And that's where you start to see predatory money things coming in. If they jam in microtransactions, if they up the costs for things, things start to expand. So that is where you get these problems, and it becomes a bigger problem in gaming, because now, in the past couple of years since COVID, you saw a whole load of games companies that were taking products that had been built. And these products, different games that had been built, they were buying up IPs and sort of consolidating them into different types of companies so that they could develop them further, because the idea was, there's a huge gaming boom, let's just invest all this money and try and make a whole load of profit. Now, this gaming boom led to some things that would have been basic becoming a hell of a lot bigger, and you had some fantastic gaming releases from it. But at the same time, you've had a whole load of games recently that have been cancelled by their parent companies when they were fantastic. They were great ideas, and these games have then just sort of disappeared on us, and it's becoming more and more prevalent. The reason is because if you spend money as a company building something, but you get to the point where you don't think you would make enough of a profit on it, you're going to make a profit, but you might not make everything you want to. That game then becomes more valuable as a tax write-off. So if you cancel that game's development, you can then say, well, this has actually gone in a way that we didn't want, we'll use it as a tax write-off, which will up our profits from something else. And that's something that becomes particularly dangerous when you've got that corporate mindset, that business mindset around about it. People are making games, but they might not have any intention of finishing them, or they might just go, well, we know it's 90% complete, but we're going to scrap it right now because it's worth more to us. It's worth more to the company to just not exist. But then you've got the other side of it, where games are rushed out, and Bethesda has been the absolute nightmare for this. That's why it's known as Bugthesda, where I had friends that for years were screaming about how good Starfield was going to be, and I was kind of excited, but I'm a Fallout person, I really liked that. However, Fallout 4, when it came out, was buggy as hell, and because of how buggy it was, when 76 was announced, I decided not to buy Fallout 76 on pre-order like I had done with, I think it was Fallout 4. So I didn't pre-order it deliberately because of all of the issues, and I thought I'll wait until a little bit and see how it is, and I might buy it on the day when it comes out. But I could also see the problems with what they were describing for the multiplayer. There was a lot of sort of stuff that they were describing that, just going from an EVE Online, I could just see ganking up the wazoo and issues all over the place. So I didn't pre-order it, and when it was finally released, we all sort of know exactly how bad it was. And that, for me, sort of one of the big things was the fact that they hadn't even got the most recent version of their own game engine into it. That was a big warning sign. So when Starfield came out, I did actually buy it and I played it, I still own it, but it's boring. I haven't finished it because it's just cutscenes after cutscenes, and if you know Starfield, if you jump to Mars, you immediately put out of a place where you have to go through a cutscene. You have to go through a loading scene to get into the main settlement. So you go through a loading scene to get to a place where you jump through another loading scene. It makes no sense whatsoever. It shows the complete lack of interest of anybody, or the lack of quality assurance when they're actually doing the testing, which for me it all comes from the same place. People are not paying attention to what they are making. And this is one of the big problems when you have this corporate mindset behind it. Because you have all of these people that are intently focused on what they are doing. All of these people that are intently focused on the profit. Not the game, but the profit. And the developers that are actually paying attention to the game are not the ones who are sort of have very much in the way of a voice when it comes to talking about these things. That becomes quite a big problem in gaming, and it is quite a big problem in gaming, and it, for my opinion, it is essentially the problem that we have with almost every game that is created today, is that you have a couple of investors, but the more and more you get, the more isolated they get. The bigger the gaming company, the less faces there are that face the customers, and the less sort of helpful cooperation there is inside the company. And you get all these little things that become just little tiny warheads that could explode and cause massive problems. And if one goes off, it's not so much of a problem, but if lots of them go off, then you get to a situation where it's just not good for not just that game, not just that company, but the entire industry as a whole. So this is actually at the point within the gaming industry where sections of games, even entire game endings, are being left out of it, and nobody's getting this sort of satisfying ending to the game. Assassin's Creed is a particular one that did this, where the ending of one of the games did not make any sense at release. It just all of a sudden you randomly stab somebody and she happened to be a traitor, and there is no explanation as to why. And no matter how many times you go through it and replay it, it doesn't make sense. However, if you then go and get the DLC, then it makes sense. And that's one of the big problems. You had this being done back in the day with Mass Effect 3, where the Leviathan DLC was a major chunk of the content, of the explanation of the story. It explained how it all started, but it was arbitrarily left out at launch, even though it was actually one of the first things finished for the game. But they did it to make a little bit more money, because people are going to want to know that section of the story. And that's kind of a disgusting thing for a corporation to do, is to make something. Imagine you watched a film but you had to pay an extra 10 quid to see the ending of it, or you watched the Avengers, say, and you had to pay an extra 10 quid to see all of Robert Downey Jr.'s scenes. It's just exploitation. That's all it can be said. It's a nasty ass thing to see going on. And that's the single player market. You've also got this just general wanking for coins that happens within multiplayer markets. You've got an entire unregulated gambling industry within certain online multiplayer games. There's an interesting thing that's actually going on with CCP at the moment, because where CCP is based, one of their mechanics is actually illegal, because you are not allowed to make gambling mechanics in that sort of are based on real world money. So that whole little lottery system that's inside EVE is questionable at best, and a very dangerous manoeuvre. There is some argument to be said that the servers aren't there, but the company is, so that's interesting in itself. You've got the entire thing with Grand Theft Auto, where there was a whole sort of money system. You even had as far as the Steam store, where they actually put in keys to be able to open the loot boxes, because the loot boxes themselves from Counter-Strike were being used to launder money. It got so severe. So these are things that are very bad for the industry, break trust with everybody. And now you've got this older generation of gamers that are having kids, that have had kids, that inform their kids about these predatory things. So the kids will actually learn at a younger age what this is, and it will kill the gaming industry. When you've got all of these companies being bought up and then closed just because somebody wants a write-off on their books, it's just of no help to anybody. So this is something that I think needs looked at, not just in the aspects of one particular gaming company, but as a whole. Sort of keep your eyes out for it, look at it, realise what's happening, because it's dangerous for our entire hobby. So with all that having been said, thanks for watching. Stuff down below in the doobly-doo. As usual, I'll always ask for comments. I like comments, criticisms, all of this jazz. I like seeing everything now down below and interacting with everybody that's watching the videos. I especially like opposing viewpoints. If you think that predatory gaming is a good idea, then definitely I want to hear your opinion. Especially if you're an EA executive, please put down your postal details. I'm very interested to speak to and or meet you. But then for everybody else, there is the usual sort of links if you want a couple of million extra or a million extra skill points within EVE Online. There's some stuff there that kicks back to me. There is, I'll put some links down for Space Engineers and for Kerbal Space Program. There are not anything that I get any bonus off, just if you're looking for the games, they're down below. Both of those have fantastic online communities, especially when it comes to other people making things. Everything that you saw on screen was made by other people, with the exception of the big orange ships, because that's just fun. Bye!